Welcome everybody to the 2023 Green Party of Hawai'i annual convention. And we're going to start out with three wonderful guest speakers to focus on ranked choice voting. We're going to start with Rob Richie, President and CEO of FairVote, a nonpartisan organization seeking better elections for all. Rob is a specialist on ranked choice voting nationally, followed by Sandy Ma, former executive director of Common Cause Hawai'i. She is an expert on the ranked choice movement in Hawaii. And then we'll finish up with David Cobb, our political activist and former Green Party presidential candidate in 2004. All right, let's start with Rob Richie. What is happening with the national ranked choice voting movement?
Well, thank you, Sylvia. It's good to see everyone in this virtual world that we are in right now. And but I do envy where at least a lot of you are there in Hawaii, and excited that when you do, for whatever reason, have a congressional vacancy or county vacancy election, it will be ranked choice voting in one general election. And Sandy will share a lot about how that happened. And it's part of that change that came to Hawaii is, and we of course don't want to stop there, but it is an example of why I think it's fair to say that ranked choice voting is the fastest growing electoral reform in the country. I mean, we need it to grow faster and we need other reforms as well, but we have seen a lot of progress, and I think it both can be a problem-solving tool used in very particular ways, changing a primary election so that candidates win with a more substantial share of the vote, or replacing a two-round runoff election in a nonpartisan race. But it also is going to be used, in Hawaii, and not Hawaii, in Alaska and Maine in 2024 for presidential elections, for U.S. House elections, U.S. Senate elections. It is going to be used in a number of presidential primaries. We'll ultimately see how many those are, but interesting developments on both sides of the aisle. And I think when it gets on the ballot in cities, it doesn't win necessarily anywhere, but it's won the last 22 straight times it's been on the ballot. David Cobb was among a part of one of those, and has done a lot on this issue sort of over the years. And it's just exciting to see the number of people working on it in different ways and different levels. We've got members of Congress that are leading on it. A former FairVote board member, Jamie Raskin, is looking at ways it could move in U.S. House, in Congress. We have kind of a range of bills, both really practical ones and kind of bigger ones there. We had bills in about 30 state legislatures. The Oregon House of Representatives passed a bill that would use ranked choice voting for really all their major elections, put it on the 2024 ballot. For those who have followed politics may know the Oregon Senate is in this sort of stymied place where they're not moving things, but it still has a chance to move at least by early next year and get to the 2024 ballot. And that's part of the fact that in Oregon, the biggest city in Oregon, Portland, passed ranked choice voting last year. Its biggest county, Multnomah County, passed it. And in fact, the biggest city in 7 states now has passed ranked choice voting, the biggest of which is New York City. It only does it for primary elections, and we don't want to stop there, but that was a very impactful use in New York, and it's using like Salt Lake City, and that's being done this November there, and kind of a mix of other cities around the country. So it's something that I think has gone from an idea that made sense and solves problems. A lot of people really began to think a lot about this, at least of a certain generation during the 2000 election, when there was a lot of concern that maybe Ralph Nader's decision to run as a Green Party candidate might have an impact on the presidential choice between Al Gore and George Bush. And lo and behold, there was an argument that did happen. And it just sort of made sense, like, could we just set aside that whole fight and debate and just let people run, let people make their case, and have it be like Australia, where they'll generally have 7 candidates on average run for all their elections with ranked choice voting and using partisan elections, and no one ever points a finger at someone else for running. You can always put your hat in the ring and make your case. And if there's anything that's obvious about our politics today, we need to expand choice. We need to offer options other than maybe two, 75 to 80-year-old men running for president. And, I think that this is, at that level, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense just to do things like city councils and mayors. And really what we're hoping to see, and are working with kind of a fun mix of activists, very well-established groups and lots of startup ranked choice voting groups, and more than half of states, to really reimagine voting as ranking. Like when you have a ballot and you've got multiple choices on it, we should just automatically be thinking ranking. That just really gives voters a certain sense of power. I assume most of you on this call, I've just sort of been talking about is everyone knows what it is, but it's a very simple concept. So rather than a ballot where you just tick one and leave the rest of it blank, no matter what you think, you can say, oh, no, here's my first choice. If you have a second choice, you can indicate it. If you have a third choice, you can indicate it. That's your simple act as a voter. And the evidence shows that, that's really easy for voters to do. One use of it, by the way, was in Hawaii for the Hawaii Democrats. I used it in their presidential primary, as did a number of other states in 2020. And like all around the states that did that, 99.8% of people or more could accurately rank someone. And most people ranked more than one. And that's giving people, power and options. And you do that, and then you just add up all the first choices. If someone when you're just electing one person gets more than half the vote, you're done. They've got 50% plus one. You got a majority, but if not, the candidate who trails the field in last place is eliminated. You look at those ballots, you add them to their second choices on each ballot. That's where the instant runoff concept comes in. And you just do that until a candidate is in that winning position of more than half the vote. So it's kind of a win-win for voters being able to vote freely for a candidate who might not have a chance to win, give them their best shot, while also ensuring that the winner is someone who has done something to really earn a majority and earn more than half the votes. Maybe David may get into this because he's doing some good work on this, but there are forms of ranked choice voting that are forms of proportional representation. The Portland measure that passed last year in Oregon was one that for the city council established the proportional form of ranked choice voting. So that's what they're going to do next year. And that's something that we ultimately hope to see pass in Congress in the form of some form like the Fair Representation Act, which is a bill that about 10 members of Congress are supporting. So we're really excited about what can be done, intrigued for what it will mean when you finally have one of these vacancy elections in Hawaii. Hope that we can find ways to support your election officials to make it smooth and easy, as we know that can happen, and keep the conversation going for all other kinds of elections. And maybe I'll turn it back to the host here.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and move along to Sandy Ma. And yeah, Sandy is former executive director of Common Cause Hawai'i, which is a nonpartisan grassroots organization protecting Hawaii's political process and promoting fair and honest elections. And she has been active in the RCV movement in Hawaii. Sandy, tell us a little more about yourself, and I understand you have a slide presentation for us too.
Aloha, everyone. It's really good to see you all. I'm so happy to be here to talk about the ranked choice voting movement in Hawaii. As Sylvia said, I was the Common Cause Hawaii Executive Director. I was Executive Director in 2022 when the ranked choice voting bill that Rob talked about passed the legislature and was signed into law by our Governor Ige, or then Governor Ige. I'm very excited to talk about the movement in Hawaii to get to that point and how the movement is still growing. So I'm going to start sharing my slides, and then if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. Can everyone see my slides? Yes? Can you see?
It says it's loading.
Oh, okay. Well, give me a thumbs up when it's finished loading.
Okay, we'll do.
So I'm basically going to talk about the ranked choice voting movement in Hawaii, a 10-year review from 2013 to 2023, this current Hawaii legislative session that just ended. Is it still loading for everyone?
It's loading for me.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Geez. Let me know if you want me to stop sharing. I could just talk off the cuff.
If it doesn't load, we can have Mike post it.
Sure.
Baron is wondering if you're sharing your browser
Um,
or sharing the whole screen.
I'm sharing the full screen. I'm not quite sure what that question means. I mean,
Oh.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah, on some screen shares, you have the choice to share the browser or the screen. I'm wondering if that matters. Would you be okay with sharing the slides without having full screen? Because we were, yeah, like that. We're able to see
Okay.
that.
Okay, that's totally fine
Yeah.
then. So,
Thank you.
yeah, sorry about that. Ranked choice voting movement in Hawaii for the past 10 years. In 2013 and 2014, we did not have any ranked choice voting bills introduced in the Hawaii State Legislature in either the House or the Senate. In 2015, we had our first bill introduced in the past decade on ranked choice voting in the Senate by Senator Leslie O'Hara, who's a great supporter of good government measures. So this bill, SB 623, while it was introduced, did not get any hearings. So moving on to 2016, no bills were scheduled. No bills were introduced in the House or Senate in the state legislature on ranked choice voting. In 2017, this is where we're really warming up on ranked choice voting bills. One ranked choice voting bill was introduced in the House by then Representative Scott Saiki. And so this bill by Scott Saiki establishes ranked choice voting for special elections for congressional races. This bill actually moved in the House and it crossed over from the House to the Senate, but did not get any hearings in the Senate. And as everyone knows on this Zoom meeting that Scott Saiki is now the speaker, and so he is a supporter of ranked choice voting. In 2017, two ranked choice voting bills were also introduced in the Senate. One was introduced by Carl Rhodes. Carl Rhodes is a big supporter of ranked choice voting. He's been introducing ranked choice voting bills since at least 2017. So this bill in 2017 establishes ranked choice voting for special elections for congressional races and election of council members in counties that have adopted the method. So, but no hearings were scheduled in the Senate for either of these two ranked choice voting bills. And then 2018, again, no bills were introduced in the Hawaii State Legislature, so we kind of got stuck a little in 2018 from the movement in 2017. In 2019, Scott Saiki, who introduced a House ranked choice voting bill in 2017, in 2019, Scott Saiki became Speaker. And so 4 bills were introduced in the House for ranked choice voting. This was in 2019, so we're really at the starting gate coming out in support of ranked choice voting. HB 2010 provides for ranked choice voting for all partisan primary elections, special elections, nonpartisan general elections. And that actually moved from the Senate, moved from the House to the Senate, where it did not receive a hearing in the Senate. A bill that's of real interest in 2019 is HB 626. It was introduced by then Representative Sylvia Luke, who was chair of the all-powerful Finance Committee, and she is now our Lieutenant Governor. So Sylvia Luke's bill requires vacancies in the office of the United States Representative to be filled by special election that is conducted using ranked choice voting. This bill moved. It crossed from the House to the Senate. The Senate tinkered with the bill. Thank you, Sylvia. The Senate tinkered with HB 626, and so it had to This bill had to go to conference where the changes proposed by the Senate and changes proposed by the House can be reconciled. It did not make it out of conference committee and died, but this is a good movement for a bill. So in 2019, again, there were 4 ranked choice voting bills introduced in the Senate. And the bill that's of most interest is Carl Rhodes' bill, Senator Carl Rhodes, SB 427. His bill establishes ranked choice voting for special federal elections and special elections of vacant county council seats. This bill also moved from the Senate to the House. The House made some changes to it, so it had to be reconciled with the Senate version that crossed over and went to conference where it ultimately died. So 2 ranked choice voting bills in 2019 moved to conference. And so that's a good omen, a good portent for ranked choice voting. And this bill that Senator Rhodes introduced in 2019 ultimately got passed in a different year. So in 2020, we're holding steady on ranked choice voting bills. 2 were introduced in the House, and 1 was introduced in the Senate again. In the House bills, they moved, but it did not go to conference. Senate, Carl Rhodes' ranked choice voting bill crossed over from the Senate to the House and died in the House. And this is the same bill that he proposed in 2019, which is to establish ranked choice voting for special federal elections and special elections of vacant county council seats. So in 2021, we're holding steady. No bills were introduced in the House on ranked choice voting, but 3 bills were introduced in the Senate on ranked choice voting. And the bill that's of most interest is Senator Carl Rhodes' SB 560. Again, it establishes ranked choice voting for special federal elections and special elections of vacant county council seat. This bill again moved from the Senate to the House, where the House disagreed with the Senate version of the bill that crossed over. The bill went to conference and it did not pass out of conference. And so we get to 2022, and this is where we achieve success on ranked choice voting in Hawaii. And this was just last year. So there was a ranked choice voting bill that was introduced in the House. HB 1882 is introduced by then Chair of the House Judicial and Hawaiian Affairs Committee, Mark Nakashima, and we asked him, Common Cause Hawai'i asked him to introduce this bill, HB 1882. But he did not schedule a hearing. And the reason he didn't schedule a hearing on this bill is because Senator Carl Rhodes' bill introduced in 2022, SB 2162, was moving. So again, 2162 establishes ranked choice voting for special federal elections and special elections of vacant county council seats. So this bill moved from the House, from the Senate to the House. There was agreement on the bill and it moved out of conference and was signed into law by then Governor Ige as Act 047 Session Laws of Hawaii 2022 on June 17 of last year. So we actually have a ranked choice voting bill that passed the legislature. And so we're very happy about that and really grateful for all the supporters. This past legislative session that just ended in Hawaii, the 2023 legislative session, there is still movement and appetite for ranked choice voting in the legislature. 1 bill was introduced in the House and 1 bill was introduced in the Senate, and it was to expand ranked choice voting in the elections. Neither of these bills received a hearing in either chamber, but this shows that there are people who still want to expand ranked choice voting in Hawaii. So that's really great news. So ranked choice voting, the movement has really grown and was quite successful in the last legislative session. So why did ranked choice voting pass in 2022? First off, the bill that actually passed and became law, Act 047, is a narrow one. And it was a narrow one tailored to address 2 issues that we've seen in Hawaii. In 2010, there were 2 special elections that resulted in a plurality winner. Thank you, Sylvia. One of the special elections was to replace then Representative Abercrombie, who wanted to run for governor. So a special election was held. There were 14 candidates of various parties running to replace Abercrombie in the House. Republican Charles DeJoux won with 39% of the vote, and the Democratic candidates, who normally is a shoo-in for congressional elections, the Democratic candidates split the vote. Each got around 30-some%. Also that year in 2010, Honolulu City Council District 1 had a special election to replace Todd Apo, who left his seat. Tom Berg, a Tea Party Republican, won that race, special election race, in a crowded field of 14 candidates, and Tom Berg only won with 18.5% of the vote cast. And so this bill that passed in 2022 really addresses these two situations. It passed in 22 because we had some really, really strong partners supporting ranked choice voting, of course, the Green Party of Hawai'i. And thank you for your op-eds and the newspapers and letters to the editors supporting ranked choice voting. Of course, we have Rob from FairVote Action, who also testified and submitted written testimony in support of ranked choice voting in 2022. And Common Cause got many coalition members to support this as well. And you can see all the different people who supported ranked choice voting testified in favor of it in 2022. And plus all the countless individuals who called their legislator to make sure that the bill was heard, called letting them know they supported ranked choice voting, and submitted individual written testimony. We had so many people supporting ranked choice voting in 22 that it was a really, it showed a movement in Hawaii and a strong support for it. It also passed because, as Rob mentioned, the Hawaii Democratic Party used ranked choice voting in the 2020 presidential primary. And so people had some level of familiarity with ranked choice voting amongst Democratic Party members. And as I said earlier, we earned strong, we had a strong social media campaign and a strong earned media campaign. We had tons of op-eds published, LTEs published, editorial support in our newspapers about ranked choice voting and why it would be good for Hawaii. We created a website. When I say we, Common Cause created a website to explain ranked choice voting and why it would benefit Hawaii. We also had really strong legislative support. As I said, Speaker Psyche supported it, had introduced in the past. Chair Luke at that time had supported a ranked choice voting bill in the past. They were versions of the one that ultimately passed in 22. We had a ton of other legislative support. Carl Rhodes, Chris Lee, Senator Sam Buenaventura, and of course, Senator Les Ihara. They all supported ranked choice voting. So where is ranked choice voting now? In review, it is growing. There is still support for ranked choice voting and expanding it to more elections than just the special federal election and special vacant county council elections. So thank you everyone for letting me talk about the movement in ranked choice voting, and thank you for your support. We could not have done it without everyone's help. I think you're still on mute, Sylvia.
Thank you for that. Okay, let me start that again. Thank you, Sandy Ma, for your input. Very welcomed. And we're going to finish off with our last guest speaker before we have questions. And Mike, if you want to go ahead and turn on chatting for all of the audience, I'm thinking that while David is talking, people can be thinking of questions for any of our panelists, and we'll look at your questions and see if we have time for the speakers to answer any of those. And David, he is a political activist and former Green Party presidential candidate in 2004. And he's been doing a lot of work with ranked choice voting. So we're very honored to have you here today. Thank you, David.
Aloha. As Sandy said, Sylvia said, my name is David Cobb. I use he, him pronouns. And the way I usually introduce myself is that I'm a lawyer by training, but I'm a social change advocate by nature, because I know what other Green Party members know, and that is that this country and this world is in a tipping point. There's an ecological crisis that is not just coming, it's here and getting worse. There's an economic crisis. There's a political crisis. Fascism is rising. And in the midst of all of that, it might behoove us to ask, or ask myself, why do I continue to spend so much time on ranked choice voting? And that's because it's a winnable reform that is a step towards the transformational change that I want to be part of. Now, as Rob said, I want to be very explicit and clear. I am actually a former employee of Rob Richie. Oh, those long years ago, Rob, you'll remember that back when FairVote used to be called the Center for Voting and Democracy, Rob Richie inspired me by a presentation I heard at a Green Party meeting back in 1999, and it just, a light bulb went off for me. And I realized that this reform, which seems like a kind of policy wonky reform, really could be the step towards being able to democratize our elections. And so I know I'm speaking to the Green Party of Hawai'i, and so you are social change agents and activists. So this is how I talk to y'all, right? And I talk to other Greens, which is to inspire Greens as Greens to understand how incredibly important it is for us, right? And I also understand as a storyteller and as a social change agent that you have to speak the language that people understand. So I'm always me. I'm always honest. I'm always sincere, but I will be transparent to say, if I go into a pool hall or a bowling alley, I'm still me, but I use slightly different language whenever I'm talking to folks, right? And so that's one of the things that I really wanted to point out, is that part of the reason that ranked choice voting movement is growing, and as both Rob's presentation and then Sandy's presentation specifically in Hawaii shows, this movement is absolutely growing. The movement for ranked choice voting is getting larger, stronger, and better organized with every election cycle. And we don't win every time, but we're batting average. If we were, if this was Major League Baseball, ranked choice voting would be guaranteed Hall of Fame on the first vote. I mean, it is 22 victories in a row. Is like, this never happens, y'all. Like, so the movement is growing. And I want to take a step back and say, when I'm talking to Green Party activists, this is the language that I use, right? Now I want to take a step back and say, when I'm talking to somebody who is not as politically savvy or as active, here's how I talk about ranked choice voting. First of all, I say, y'all, ranked choice voting is as easy as 1, 2, 3, because all we're trying to do is say that we're empowering voters to not just pick one candidate, but the voter, you, the voter, are empowered to fully express your opinion of the candidates. My first choice is, my second choice is, my third choice is. So automatically, right off the bat, I hope you can see that ranked choice voting is actually better for the voter because you're fully expressing your opinion. And counting the ballots is equally easy, because all you do is count up the ballots and say, all right, of the first preference votes, of the first choice, did anybody get a majority? Because if anybody got a majority, then boom, they're the winner, right? Majority rules, that's ground into us. But if nobody won, then you say, well, all right, then all we're asking is who got the very fewest number of first preference votes, right? Because that's the least preferred candidate of all. So we just say, all right, that candidate is no longer in the running. But the people who voted for that candidate, they didn't waste their votes. Why? Because on their ballot, they've already indicated who their second preference is. So their first preference candidate has been eliminated, but now their second choice is still in the running, and their vote goes now and counted towards their second choice. And you just go to the process. So the point I'm making is you can explain this, and I know because I've done it literally to elementary schools. For real, Bayside Elementary here in Humboldt County, California, I gave a presentation on ranked choice voting and the kids loved it. Like, this is a very easy thing to understand. And the folks who try to make it complicated are almost always the political operatives, right? Like, at the end of the day, what we found is that ranked choice voting is profoundly popular amongst ordinary folk once they are exposed to it for the first time. Now, I also, whenever I'm talking to folks, I say, you know, think about it. We make choices all the time. Like, we're very accustomed to ranking our choices. I want you to all imagine for a moment, it's a very hot summer day, right? And it's Hawaii. I've had the privilege of traveling to Paradise, and I know it can get hot. So now I want you to imagine, hey, we're going to an ice cream parlor. And you go to an ice cream parlor, and I'll speak for myself, and I say, oh boy, I'm really looking forward to a mango sorbet. And they say, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have sorbet here. I don't turn around and leave. I say, okay, well, my second choice is cookies and cream. Right? The point is, we all make choices every day. And why shouldn't our opportunity to vote for candidates, why shouldn't we be empowered to make those choices as well? So, in other words, what I'm trying to get you to understand is, when you, like, always think about who your audience is and start where they are. Like, don't get right into the deeper politics unless that's where they take you. Another point that I want to make is, when I'm talking to new folks, I like to take it out of electoral politics and the ideological struggles that might come up and just point out things like, look, ranked choice voting is used for selecting the most valuable player in the National Football League. Ranked choice voting is used to select the most valuable player in Major League Baseball. Ranked choice voting is used to elect the Academy Awards winners. Ranked choice voting is used by the U.S. Political Science Association. And y'all, we would think that political scientists might know a thing or two about how to conduct elections. So the point is, ranked choice voting is used all across the world in both elections of all types, not just in elections for political office, right? So ranked choice voting is just a good idea. The other thing I like to remind people is, ranked choice voting is used in places, it's not just a progressive or a liberal idea. You know, that great bastion of lefty liberals, the Utah Republican Party? The Utah Republican Party uses ranked choice voting. Why? Because it's a better system to guarantee majority rule. So again, that's the point that I want to make big picture wise. Now I want to just for a moment hone in, as Rob said, I've had the privilege of advocating for ranked choice voting at the state level, at the local level. The most recent place where we won, and won big, was where I live now and have since 2003, Humboldt County, California, in Eureka. And I'm going to share my screen to show you the very simple language that we used for the ballot measure. Again, remember, we put it on the ballot as a charter amendment, right? And we can talk about that maybe during the discussion phase, and maybe it's even happened in the chat, I'm not sure. But the point is, we made a conscious decision to take it to the voters to amend our charter to use it because we are a charter city. So what I want to do now is just share my screen very quickly and show you, this is the argument in favor of Measure C. Now, I want you to see the plain and simple language that we use. It improves elections. A short, concise sentence right off the bat that just say we're improving election. It empowers voters to fully express their opinion. It frees us from the lesser of two evil options. It saves money by eliminating the need for runoff elections because we had been using runoffs, right? So you see in 3 sentences, what we've done in a non-ideological way is to say, we're going to improve elections. Voters can fully express their opinion. We'll free ourselves from lesser evil voting. We'll save money. Then we go through at the time, and Rob can tell you, If we were writing it now, we'd have even better statistics to share. But at the time that we were running, we talked about 15 cities, the state of Maine. We talked about the Utah Republican Party. We also talked about how many voters are actually feeling like they don't vote because they feel disempowered, and how ranked choice voting can be used to inspire people, encourages more candidates to run. And then we actually hit these points that I want to make very quickly. And I know I've got 5 minutes left. One, and this is something very important in this polarized moment of history, ranked choice voting discourages negative campaigning. Our current kinds of elections actually encourage it. And the data, the social science is very clear. If I'm running against Rob Richie, it's actually to my benefit to try to suppress his vote. And so talking badly about him and doing negative campaigning, sadly, the data shows it works. That's really terrible, but true. But in a ranked choice voting, it doesn't work. Why? Because I'm trying to, even if I am not going to get, I want Rob's voters to consider me as the second choice instead of Sandy. So if you've got multiple candidates, I'm literally encouraged to try to persuade folks to list me second. Like, obviously, I want everybody to list me first, but if I can't get you as my first choice, I want you to list me as my second choice. It obviously provides more choices. It also minimizes strategic voting. And then the data shows that it promotes broader representation. The last thing I want to show you on this is, please note that David Cobb and the Green Party is not on this. This is something that was mailed to every voter. Instead, we got the Secretary Treasurer of the AFL-CIO, our Central Labor Council. Then we got the steering committee chair of the North Coast People's Alliance, which is a group that is not a nonpartisan group, but a transpartisan group, a good government group. And lastly, the board treasurer of Cooperation Humboldt, which is a solidarity economy group. Why the board treasurer? Because I was the executive director of Cooperation Humboldt, and too many people already knew me as a Green Party advocate. So we were trying to get this off of the idea that this was a Green Party thing, and instead to really get it to the point of this is just good government. So I'm going to conclude my thoughts with this, to just remind you that there are, when you're lobbying an elected official because there's a bill going, there's a different conversation. And Sandy could absolutely give you the talking points, and I'm sure there are fact sheets on how to best lobby. But I think that the bigger part that we can play as ordinary folks is to build the movement of other ordinary people to understand how powerful and important ranked choice voting can be. With that, I'm going to stop talking, and hopefully somebody's been following the chat, and maybe Sandy and Rob and myself could have a little discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We do have some questions in the chat. There was one for Sandy Ma about where was it about? Should we start this at the county level, or what is the best inroad?
That's a great question. So thanks to the person who asked it. We were looking at actually trying to, in 2022, when we were discussing bills to introduce in the legislative session, we were trying to think of maybe having a pilot project and selecting a county to do a pilot project in which all the elections are by ranked choice voting. Instead of pushing a bill that's only for special federal elections or special vacant county council seats, trying to get support to make a county a pilot project for all the bills, all the elections being by ranked choice voting. We ultimately decided not to do that because the charter controls a lot of the government elections by county, and a lot of the charters, almost every single charter we reviewed had had language casting into doubt that if the state mandated ranked choice voting for that county for all elections, that could withstand judicial scrutiny. And so we just decided to do federal special elections and Bacon County Council seat elections. So it would be really great to advocate on the county level for a charter amendment to allow specifically for ranked choice voting. We actually worked with the Maui County Charter Commission to try to introduce a provision to amend the Maui County Council Charter to allow for ranked choice voting. But because there were so many charter provisions that were being pushed at the charter amendment revision time, that that ranked choice voting was not something that was adopted. But it's a great question.
Yeah,
Local level, yeah.
Sandy, you also actually had a question for Rob about the jurisdictions. Can you ask him that again?
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to know from Rob, which jurisdictions on the continent does he think is most promising to move a ranked choice voting election bill or amendment?
Yeah, excuse me. Good to hear everyone. And the website fairvoteaction.org, which is our advocacy arm, has reports on legislation and ballot measures. There were a number of state legislative bills that one in Oregon I mentioned is the one that I think has the best chance to, in a very major way, advance ranked choice voting. The Speaker of the House in Oregon is a big fan of RCV and actually led one of the local campaigns for it a few years ago before he was Speaker. There's a number of bills moving on presidential primaries, and none of them will affect 2024 at this point, but I could see in the next 12 months some version of New Jersey, Illinois, Rhode Island, Vermont. Some others are taking a look at it for 2028, and I think the cycle as it unfolds will create opportunities for that. It's going to be on some more local ballots in Michigan, 3 cities in Michigan, maybe. One here in Maryland and one in Ohio. In 2024, I think is going to be an uptick in sort of significant cities voting on it, and prospectively additional states. So things are moving.
Thanks, Rob. I also have a question for Sandy. This is from Susan Roberts-Emery, our female co-chair. She's asking, who are the best supporters in the Hawaii legislature now, or national, but I assume Hawaii?
I can answer for Hawaii. I'm going to leave it to Rob and David to talk about the national supporters of ranked choice voting. So for Hawaii, there are legislators who support it, and then there are legislators who are in leadership roles. And so you really have to get the legislators in leadership roles to support ranked choice voting. And when I say leadership roles, like for the chairs of committees, majority leader in the House and Senate, and the Speaker, and of course the Senate President. So if you get leadership to support your ranked choice voting bill, it will move more easily. There are, of course, other legislators who are very supportive of ranked choice voting, like Representative Natalia Hussey-Burdick. She's very supportive. Let's see, Representative Amy Peruso in the House is very supportive. There are lots of progressive legislators who support it, but you really have to convince leadership. And that means like chair of House Finance, chair of House Judiciary, which is David Tarnas. David Tarnas is a supporter of ranked choice voting. So hopefully there could be a hearing in his committee. But it's really getting leadership. In the Senate, of course, we have Senator Joy San Buenaventura. She's always supportive. Senator Ihara, Senator Rhodes, whose ranked choice voting bill passed, Senator Lee. They are all very supportive, but again, it's leadership. So you really need the approval of WAM, Senate WAM Chair Donovan Dela Cruz, who has gotten some very poor press in Hawaii in the last several months. But talking to legislators is incredibly important, explaining what ranked choice voting is, and and how it will benefit the people. And so I hope I answered that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy Ma. I don't see any further questions at the moment, but we could post that question to either David or Rob on the national level. Who are the people supporting ranked choice voting in our legislatures? Go ahead, David.
Well, I'm going to let Rob Richie answer that question because I was going to actually ask a question directly to Sandy. So Rob, and besides, Rob Richie is going to be the if there's ever a question that I have about ranked choice voting sort of out in the larger world, Rob Richie is the person I ask anyway.
Well, thank you, David. You're the one to call on for inspiration. I would say we've really got some great members. So check out the again, Fair Representation Act, check out, or rather fairvote.org and fairvoteaction.org. But I actually was just with Ro Khanna last night, the California congressman. He's a big fan of ranked choice voting. As is Teresa Fernandez, a congresswoman from New Mexico, who actually represented FairVote in a lawsuit in 2018 against Santa Fe to make sure that they implemented ranked choice voting, and that then got elected in 2020. She's a really makes a great case for it. As I mentioned, Jamie Raskin, Don Beyer, actually Hakeem Jeffries, the Speaker of the House, backed the New York City ballot measure for ranked choice voting in 2019, and Catherine Clark, who's in the leadership for the Democrats, also backed the Massachusetts measure for RCV. We have Andrew Yang on our board, and the Forward Party, and the small party leadership, growing party leadership is generally on board. We can go on, but I'll turn it over to David for your question.
Thank you, Rob. And Sandy, I really appreciated the level, frankly, the level of political sophistication that you were describing, not only in your slideshow, but in the response. So my question to you is sort of an inside baseball one, right? Because again, I'm a lawyer, I'm a political activist. My instinct is usually to say, local elections, like if we can get a local election and then you show, right, in a local election how good it is, then more people. And I think that history has shown that that's actually worked for us, right, in this reform. And I also know that Hawaii is really unique, right? Its governmental structure is, I think, the only one in all of the United States that's limited to the two levels of government. There's state and then the counties. And I know that, but I also know that there are charters. So I'm wondering, would it make sense to try to do a charter review, or to get our people, right, on various charter review commissions to try to do that? Or do you think that makes it more complicated? Because I'd really want to work with this growing statewide movement and coordinate with y'all and not sort of mess it up. But again, my instinct would be, hey, let's actually go at the local level where we could empower ourselves more. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
Your instincts are right on the money. Charter commission reviews are the way to go to amend the charter. Maui County also has ballot initiatives, so you could propose a ballot initiative to have ranked choice voting for all county elections. And so that was what, when I was at Common Cause Hawai'i, that was what we were working on next. We testified before the Maui County Charter Commission to support ranked choice voting. We also Kauai was undergoing a charter review at the time as well, and we talked with Kauai charter review members to ask them to support ranked choice voting. So it is definitely something that should be done at the local level, so that if the state actually mandates ranked choice voting across all elections, it won't conflict with your charter, and then you could do it first as well.
So, Rob, I'm just going to say, if you decide that you need to get a ranked choice voting advocate in Hawaii to do some, campaigning, I'm your boy. I'm ready to go.
There we go. Well, Blair was there back in the day. Blair Bobier, and some people may know Blair, but actually was sort of helping us out at the same time that you were working with us in Texas, and he was also splitting some time and doing some work in Oregon, and actually was involved in the success in that's happening in Oregon right now.
Thank you for those answers. There were other questions answered in the chat that I'd like to mention. Sandy Ma pointed out that for information about ranked choice voting in Hawaii, you can go to rcvhawaii.org. And I want to thank everybody for working so hard for Hawaii. All three of these guest speakers are working for ranked choice voting in Hawaii. Rob, Richie, Sandy Ma, and David Cobb. Are there any more questions from the panelists for each other by any chance? Or from the audience? Okay, Nick asked Rob a question. What cities, towns in Maryland are pushing ranked choice voting?
So Rockville, which REM song fans who don't go back to Rockville fans may know that's voting on ranked choice voting in November. Here in mighty Tacoma Park, we passed it years ago. But cities in Maryland can just pass it, and there's new energy to try to do so in a number of cities. So I could imagine in the next couple of years, kind of a whole slew of cities moving it. And we have sort of a general movement goal of trying to go from the about 60 cities that have ranked choice voting now, and let's get to 500 sometime in the next 3, 4, 5 years. And I think with collective focus and prioritization, that's actually quite achievable. And go from like the biggest city in 7 states using RCV to like 15, like Albuquerque, Anchorage, and Boston all have very active efforts, and then Los Angeles and Chicago, and just keep it rolling from there. So yeah, there's definitely things happening.
That's encouraging. David, go ahead.
Thank you. So 2 things. One, I do want to make a comment and then ask Rob a specific question. So the first comment is to remember that when you're looking at ranked choice voting, the whole thing is that you're ranking the candidates. And we didn't really get into the details, but I do want to underscore that a form of ranked choice voting can be what's known as single transferable vote. And what's really great about that is it is literally proportional representation using ranked choice voting. And proportional representation for me is the gold standard for elections, right? It eliminates not only the first past the post winner take all plurality elections, but it really is more democratic, and it ensures that as long as you have a modicum of support for a party or an ideology, you'll actually get representation. And I'm crazy enough to actually believe in democracy, and I actually believe that we should have a system where people are actually represented and not just that one side wins. So I do want to just say a word about single transferable vote as a form of ranked choice voting, which I think is really the gold standard. Now, if you're only electing an executive like a mayor, if you're only going to have one winner, then a standard ranked choice voting makes sense. But if you're electing a city council, if you're electing multiple people in one election, single transferable vote is the way to go. I just wanted to put that out there. Rob, I wanted to ask you where, sort of update me, right? We haven't spoken in a while, but update us on where are the places that are typically considered either politically or culturally conservative, where ranked choice voting has some juice, so that we can continue to point out that this is just good policy and it's not merely ideological. I mean, I know the Green Party of Hawaii, right? I know, I'm talking to fellow leftists here, but I'd love to know from you, Rob, when we're talking to other folks who may not share our conviction, what are some good examples?
Yeah. Well, the last couple of years have presented some new levels of partisan friction over ranked choice voting. There's a certain former president who called it ranked crap voting in his very clever way while he was up in Alaska campaigning for Sarah Palin, and Sarah Palin lost that congressional race that had ranked choice voting to Mary Peltola, the Native Alaskan who now represents the House from Hawaii, from Alaska, and there's been a reaction to certain election results to say, oh, this must not be good for Republicans, but there are a number of rational Republican actors who are thinking about it for certain uses. The two states where there's the strongest levels of interest are Virginia and Utah. So the Republican Party of Virginia runs a lot of its own party elections and nominates, like Glenn Youngkin, their current governor, got nominated with ranked choice voting in 2021. They used it to nominate 4 members of Congress or candidates for Congress last year, and for state legislative this year. And so they've actually used it for nominations for a number of races. So they're really only interested in it in primaries. A number of leading Republicans would like to add it as an option for the government-run primaries. And in Utah, which you mentioned earlier, we've got 12 cities using ranked choice voting this November, Salt Lake, and a number of smaller communities in conservative parts of the state. And it's a bill to use ranked choice voting passed the House just for primaries in Utah just this year. And so that is a state to keep an eye on. And I think the conversation about this year's presidential primary on the Republican side is really going to generate a lot of dialogue about what crowded fields mean and the sort of pain that goes with only being able to vote for one person. And so that, I think, is going to be a real learning moment that may help us grow our Republican side. I also will just reiterate, we agree at FairVote that the single transferable vote, the proportional form of RCV, is a gold standard for legislative elections. It is what's in the Fair Representation Act in Congress. And when you look at the kinds of representational challenges that we have, the Supreme Court kind of saved, or surprisingly kind of upheld, a key provision in the Voting Rights Act this week, but also the swing vote there, Brett Kavanaugh said, but I'm not sure we need it for long, essentially, and that we ultimately need to have ways of representing all of us and every core community of us well, baked into the system itself, just baked in the fair election. So that's starting to move in more cities, and I think that's something that we will see growing in tandem with uses of traditional single winner ranked choice voting as well.
Thank you, Rob. Well, this has been a great discussion. Thank you, all 3 of you, so much for coming to speak about ranked choice voting. And I'll just close this with a comment from Baron Chun in the audience, a Green Party member, who wrote, "Perhaps it could be phrased from a rights perspective. I think it should be your right to vote however many people you want, and for all of them to be considered as legitimate choices." Thank you, all 3 of you, and thank everyone for joining us today. Mike, you can stop our recording for this segment. Thank you, everybody.